Got it. So hybrid essentially stands for securely combining on-chain and off-chain components within a smart contract, and essentially evolving not only the technology, but also our conceptualized understanding of what a smart contract is right now and what it's going to be in the future. With also Chainlink's vision to conceptualize what meta contracts are going to be. And I believe, like you mentioned, they're going to be mainly operated on the Metalayer, which is introduced also in this paper and defined as a decentralized Oracle network Metalayer. Now, where do you think that Metalayer will reside? Will it reside essentially in the plain side between different blockchain and between different oracles and off-chain and on-chain feeds? Or there's a specific place for that Metalayer within different blockchains or even the settlement layer?
So with the Metalayer, it's more of like it's kind of an abstract concept where it's not referring to a single network or a single thing, but it's more like referring to the Chainlink ecosystem and its infrastructure as a whole. So it's it's meta in the sense that it's coordinating the operation of these contracts. And within the meta layer, it consists of all these different dons, and these dons are anchored to a main chain. So essentially a meta layer, it wouldn't necessarily include a blockchain, but it would enhance a blockchain. It would make blockchains and existing layer 2 networks even better than before. And with the term meta contract, you can kind of think of that as a more evolved version of a hybrid contract. Mm-hmm. A hybrid contract's operating on chain and off chain, and so is a meta contract, but a meta contract is much more of that computation happening off chain. So it's almost like it's an off chain contract with a little bit of on chain components, and that creates a much more flexible application. So it's like on a spectrum. If you have a static contract on the left, or I mean like just on-chain code on the left, mm-hmm. and you have meta contracts on the right, the hybrid smart contracts would basically be in the middle, and it would be that entire spectrum of, you can have a little bit happening off-chain, you can have a lot happening off-chain, but the ultimate goal is to try and move a lot of that off-chain so you can decrease the costs and introduce privacy, order fairness, while maintaining trust minimization, which is achieved through this explicit staking of link and the other trust minimization methods, essentially. So you want to get the security of the blockchain while getting the scalability and efficiency of dons at the same time.
Got it. And essentially the staking plays a big role into playing the security, providing the security for the hybrid and meta contracts. But also, it seems to me the main driving force for the meta contracts is to reduce the congestion on the blockchains that those smart contracts essentially operate. An example would be Ethereum, to reduce the gas costs and reduce essentially the congestion of the flow, to make sure that net everybody is receiving a lower net gas fee for that transaction. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, each and every computation that happens on chain considered to be as a transaction, it uses in the Ethereum case, gas. Right?
Right. Yeah. So every transaction, the more complex a transaction, the more expensive it becomes. Mm-hmm. So you want to try and minimize that and move things off chain. Therefore, you keep the transaction fees low, because we've seen a lot of retail get priced out of Ethereum, unfortunately. Not everybody can do hundreds of dollars in transaction fees, and that's entirely understandable. I think layer 2 solutions, which are like a layer on top of blockchains, which scale computation, that'll help a lot. But that's kind of why we've seen things like Binance Smart Chain pop up, where, it's basically completely centralized, but it gives people the pseudo experience of interacting with smart contracts. So I think Dons will help a lot with scaling these contracts by moving the computations that don't necessarily need to happen on-chain and move that off-chain.
It seems like Chainlink also plays a big role in the layer 2, just given their positioning with hybrid and meta contracts, the way that they're going to be prioritizing off-chain computation. It feels like this is one of the reasons for them doing so, to prepare themselves for the layer 2?
I would say there's a couple different dynamics. I think that layer 2s, they're entirely complementary with Dawns, because a layer 2 is still like a blockchain. They can't connect to external resources. They don't generally have privacy or order fairness. So you could still use a Dawn to enhance existing layer 2 networks. And the other dynamic where you could consider a Dawn to be a layer 2, but it's not a generalized layer 2. It's like a application specific layer 2. Some Dawns are just going to be delivering price data. Some Dawns may just be executing options contracts. Like, it's not a generalized layer 2 like you would see with Arbitrum or Optimism. It's more application specific. Is it, just providing privacy for the execution of derivatives contracts? And a Dawn network is anchored to a main chain, as it's put in the paper, and that can be any blockchain like Ethereum, or it could be any layer 2 network. So you can actually get the benefits of the generalized nature of existing layer 2 networks, like we see with these optimistic rollups like Arbitrum and Optimism, and you can combine that benefits with more application specific Dawns to enhance specific contracts on that layer 2. But in the sense of like scaling computation, it's essentially in the same vein. Layer 2 moves things off chain. That's basically what a Dawn is doing as well. But what it's moving off chain and how it does it is quite different than more generalized layer 2 networks. So I think they're entirely complementary.
Got it. That's very fascinating. But also, given their innovation with hybrid smart contracts and meta contracts, they're net abstracting away the complexity, which is essentially the second point within their white paper, where Dawns essentially enable enterprises to connect their existing systems to a broadening array of different blockchains. For example, you mentioned Binance blockchain and Ethereum, and we know of some others like Polkadot, systems essentially without a need of specialized expertise. And given the Finance 1.0 interpretation of blockchain and their rapid advancement into this new space, the abstracting away complexity means a lot to essentially the whole blockchain space overall.
Yeah, with this point, there's kind of two dynamics. There's a developer's perspective. When you're creating a contract and it just lives on chain, that's like a single monolithic application. It's fairly simple to create. When you're creating hybrid contracts and you have to have an on-chain portion and an off-chain portion, that may be a little more advanced. So what's introduced in the paper is a compiler where you would write your application just as you do today. You put it through this compiler and it would automatically split it into its on-chain and off-chain components. And that on-chain component could be deployed to any blockchain. Off-chain can be any Dawn network and connect to any external services. So it basically allows developers to write contracts like they do today, but they get the benefits of it being a hybrid contract that runs on-chain and off-chain components. And with this, because you can deploy that on-chain code on any blockchain, Chainlink oracles essentially act like, as you said, an enterprise gateway or like a blockchain abstraction layer, where there's going to be a lot of different blockchains out there, and particularly like enterprise chains. And getting developers to integrate an enterprise's backend into each individual blockchain is probably going to be very expensive and just not practical. But what an enterprise could do instead is just integrate a Dawn network once, and now they have access to every blockchain network in which they would want to do commerce or make transactions on. If you're an entity and you're making transactions on Quorum, which is like the enterprise version of Ethereum, and you're in the US, but you have a business partner in China and they're using the BSN network, the blockchain service network, you need a connection. You need to be able to do commerce on a network you weren't integrated with before. You could integrate each time, but every time you encounter a new blockchain, it's a whole entire new integration. But if you just do it Dawn, then it doesn't matter where your counterparties are doing their contract agreements on. You automatically get to support all blockchains at the same time. So this simplicity is both for developers writing contracts and for enterprises who want to get their backend system, which secures trillions of dollars they've invested decades of years creating. There's tens of thousands of employees who know how to use that backend system. They can't just rip it out and place it with the blockchain. But what they can use is the Chainlink middleware to connect their backend system to every possible blockchain that exists today or will exist into the future. So I think that's a very profound feature of Chainlink, in addition to Oracle services, that is a little more hidden because it's more enterprise and maybe more boring. But I think it's a very impactful use case of Chainlink to simplify things for everybody, not just the enterprise.